The Grand Hyatt Ballroom in downtown Chicago still hummed with the remnants of celebration as Sarah and Michael Adler slipped away from their wedding reception. Snowflakes drifted past the hotel windows, collecting on the sills in delicate piles that glowed orange in the city lights. January in Chicago meant brutal cold, but inside, wrapped in the warmth of new marriage and champagne bubbles, Sarah felt nothing but joy. "Mrs. Adler," Michael whispered into her ear as the elevator climbed to the honeymoon suite on the 30th floor. His breath smelled of wedding cake and the expensive bourbon his father had insisted on serving at the reception. His dark hair, usually so meticulously styled, had come loose during their first dance, and Sarah reached up to brush a strand from his forehead. "Say it again," she said, leaning into his chest. His heartbeat thumped against her cheek, steady and reassuring. "Mrs. Sarah Adler." He smiled down at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling in that way she loved. "I still can't believe you agreed to marry me." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Michael scooped her into his arms. Sarah shrieked with laughter, the layers of her white dress cascading over his arms as he carried her down the carpeted hallway. The photographer had captured this moment earlier for show, but this time it was just for them. No audience, no performance. "You're going to throw your back out," Sarah teased as Michael fumbled with the key card, attempting to unlock their suite while still holding her. "Worth it," he grunted, finally pushing the door open with his shoulder and carrying her across the threshold. The honeymoon suite welcomed them with dim lighting and a trail of rose petals leading to a king-sized bed. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, the lights of neighboring skyscrapers twinkling like earthbound stars against the night sky. Michael gently set Sarah down beside the bed, his hands lingering on her waist. For a moment they just looked at each other, the reality of the day settling between them. "We did it," Sarah whispered, reaching up to loosen his bow tie. "We actually did it." "Was there ever any doubt?" Michael asked, but there was something in his voice, a slight tremor that hadn't been there before. Sarah didn't answer. There had been doubts, of course, her mother's warning about marrying after knowing someone for only 18 months. The raised eyebrows from her college friends when they learned that Michael was 10 years her senior. The subtle tension between Michael and her brother James during the rehearsal dinner. But she had pushed those doubts away, buried them beneath the avalanche of planning details and wedding excitement. Now, standing in the honeymoon suite as Michael's wife, Sarah couldn't remember why she had worried at all. "I'm going to slip into something more comfortable," she said, pressing a kiss to his cheek before retrieving a small overnight bag from the luggage that had been delivered earlier. In the bathroom, Sarah carefully removed her wedding dress, hanging it on the back of the door. She washed away her makeup, unpinned her hair, and changed into the white silk nightgown she'd bought specially for tonight. The material felt cool against her skin as she studied her reflection in the mirror. At 28, Sarah had the confident beauty of someone who had grown comfortable in her own skin. Her auburn hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and the faint dusting of freckles across her nose, which she'd covered with makeup for the wedding, now showed through. Michael always said he loved those freckles. Michael, her husband. The word still felt new and strange in her mind. She had met him at a gallery opening in River North where she'd been photographing the event for the arts magazine she worked for. Michael had been there representing his family's investment firm, which was sponsoring the exhibition. He'd approached her while she was adjusting her camera settings, commenting on her good eye before asking her to dinner. 3 days later, they had their first date at a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, where Michael had charmed her with stories of his travels and his surprising knowledge of photography. 18 months later, here they were. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the bathroom door, expecting to find Michael waiting for her with the same desire that had been building between them all day. Instead, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed except for his jacket and tie, his head in his hands. "Michael?" She approached slowly, a knot forming in her stomach. "Is everything okay?" He looked up, and the exhaustion on his face startled her. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and the lines around his mouth seemed deeper than they had been just hours ago. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice rough. I'm really tired. The wedding, all the planning, work has been insane. I think it's all catching up with me." Sarah sat beside him, the silk of her nightgown pooling around her thighs. "It's okay," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "It's been a long day. We can just sleep." Michael reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "I wanted tonight to be perfect." "Hey," she touched his face, turning it toward her. "We have the rest of our lives for perfect nights. Let's just get some rest." Relief flooded his features and he pressed a kiss to her palm. "I love you," he said. "You know that, right?" "I know," Sarah assured him, though a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something wasn't right. This wasn't just wedding day exhaustion. There was something guarded in Michael's eyes, something he wasn't telling her. They prepared for bed in silence, Michael disappearing into the bathroom to change into pajamas, while Sarah turned down the covers and switched off all but one bedside lamp. When Michael returned, he slipped under the sheets beside her and pulled her close, his arm draped over her waist. "Good night, Mrs. Adler," he murmured against her hair, but his body felt tense against hers. "Good night," she whispered back, listening as his breathing gradually deepened and slowed. Sarah lay awake long after Michael fell asleep, staring at the patterns of light the city cast across the ceiling. The excitement of the day still thrummed through her veins, making sleep impossible. That, and the nagging feeling that something was off with Michael. It was after 2 a.m. when Sarah finally drifted off, only to be awakened some time later by the absence of warmth beside her. She reached across the bed, finding Michael's side empty and cold. Blinking in confusion, Sarah sat up. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:47 a.m. The bathroom door was closed, a thin line of light visible underneath it. As she became more alert, Sarah heard it, a low, muffled sound coming from behind the door. A groan, followed by what sounded like words she couldn't make out. Sarah slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet as she approached the bathroom. The sounds continued, moans punctuated by harsh whispers. Her heart began to race, her mind spinning with possibilities, none of them good. Was he sick, in pain, or was it something else entirely? She pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear more clearly. I can't do this anymore," she heard Michael say, his voice strained and unfamiliar. "It's too much. I thought I could handle it, but I can't." Sarah's hand hovered over the doorknob, uncertainty freezing her in place. Then she heard another sound that sent ice through her veins. A second voice, too quiet to make out the words, but unmistakably not Michael's. Her husband wasn't alone in there. Sarah's hand fell away from the doorknob as if it had burned her. She backed away from the door, trying to process what she was hearing. Had someone else been in their suite all this time? Had Michael let someone in while she was sleeping? Before she could decide what to do, the voices fell silent. Sarah hurried back to bed, pulling the covers up and pretending to be asleep just as the bathroom door opened. Through barely open eyes, she watched Michael's silhouette move across the room. He was alone. He paused by the window, staring out at the city for several long minutes before finally returning to bed. Sarah felt him settle beside her, careful not to disturb her. The space between them felt vast and cold. Sarah kept her breathing even, her mind racing. Who had Michael been talking to? What couldn't he do anymore? Their marriage was less than 24 hours old, and already secrets were taking root. As the first light of dawn began to color the Chicago sky, Sarah made a decision. She would find out what her new husband was hiding, no matter what it cost her. 3 weeks into their marriage, Sarah stood in the kitchen of their Lincoln Park brownstone, chopping vegetables for dinner while Michael's voice drifted down from his upstairs office. He was on another work call, his third of the evening. The familiar cadence of his business voice, confident, assertive, slightly deeper than his normal speaking tone, filled the house. Sarah had almost convinced herself that the wedding night incident had been a product of her imagination. Almost. There had been no further late-night bathroom conversations, no mysterious voices. Michael had been attentive, affectionate, and seemingly transparent about his long workdays at Adler Investment Partners, the firm his father had founded and where Michael served as managing director. But something had changed, subtle shifts in their routine that Sarah couldn't ignore. Michael, who had once been so physically demonstrative, now initiated intimacy less frequently. He worked later, took more calls in private, and had developed a habit of checking his phone whenever it buzzed, sometimes leaving the room to respond to messages. "That was Dad," Michael announced, entering the kitchen just as Sarah finished preparing the salad. He loosened his tie and kissed her cheek. "The Wilson account is becoming complicated. They're considering pulling their investments." "Is that bad?" Sarah asked, sliding the vegetables into a bowl. "It could be. The Wilsons have been with us for over a decade." Michael opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of white wine. "Mind if I open this?" "Go ahead," Sarah said, watching as he expertly uncorked the bottle. His hands were steady, his movements precise. Everything about Michael exuded control, which made the memory of his distress that night in the bathroom all the more disturbing. They ate dinner on the small table in the breakfast nook, a habit they'd formed since moving in together 6 months before the wedding. The brownstone had a formal dining room, but they rarely used it, preferring the intimacy of the kitchen space. "How was your day?" Michael asked between bites of the grilled salmon Sarah had prepared. "Any interesting assignments?" Sarah worked as a freelance photographer, specializing in architectural photography for magazines and corporate clients. "I shot the new Morton Salt headquarters today," she said. "The light was perfect. Lots of glass and steel capturing the afternoon sun." "Sounds beautiful," Michael said, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His phone buzzed on the table, and his gaze immediately flicked toward it. "You can check it," Sarah said, keeping her voice neutral. "Might be important." Michael hesitated, then picked up the phone. His expression changed subtly as he read the message, a tightening around his mouth, a slight furrow between his brows. "Sorry," he said, typing a quick response. "Just Wilson again." Sarah nodded, but doubt crept through her mind. Michael had always been dedicated to his work, but this level of constant connectivity was new. Before their engagement, he'd been better at separating work from personal time. "I was thinking," Sarah said, setting down her fork, "we should plan that weekend trip to Michigan we talked about, the lake house your family owns in South Haven. You said spring would be nice, before the summer crowds." Michael took a sip of wine, his eyes not meeting hers. "I'd love to, but with the Wilson situation, it might be better to wait a few weeks." "Of course," Sarah said, swallowing her disappointment. "Work comes first." Michael reached across the table to take her hand. "Hey, not first, just temporarily demanding. Once we get past this rough patch, I promise we'll take that trip." Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. "I understand." Later that night, Sarah woke to find herself alone in bed again. The clock read 2:17 a.m. She sat up, listening for sounds in the bathroom, but heard nothing. The ensuite door stood open, the room dark. Pulling on her robe, Sarah ventured out into the hallway. A thin strip of light shone from beneath Michael's office door at the end of the corridor. She approached quietly, careful to avoid the creaky floorboard near the linen closet. As she drew closer, she heard Michael's voice, low and urgent. "I can't keep doing this," he was saying. The same words she'd heard on their wedding night. "The lies are becoming too complicated." Sarah's not stupid. She knows something's wrong. Sarah froze, her heart pounding so loudly she feared Michael might hear it through the door. "No, I'm not backing out," Michael continued after a pause. "I made a commitment, and I'll see it through. But we need to be more careful." Another pause, longer this time. "Tomorrow night, same time, same place. I'll make an excuse about a client dinner." Sarah backed away from the door, her mind spinning. Client dinner. Michael had already told her he had drinks scheduled with a potential investor tomorrow evening. The lies were indeed becoming more complicated, and now she had caught him in one. By the time Michael returned to bed 20 minutes later, Sarah was pretending to be asleep, her back to his side of the bed. She felt him settle in beside her, heard his sigh as he pulled the covers over himself. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but instinct told her to wait. If she revealed what she knew now, Michael would only construct more lies. No, she needed evidence, concrete proof of whatever he was hiding. The next morning, Sarah kissed Michael goodbye at the door as usual, watching as he walked to the garage where his Audi was parked. As soon as he turned the corner, she rushed back inside and up to his office. She had never searched Michael's things before. Even when they were dating, she had respected his privacy, never looking through his phone or computer. Now she felt a twinge of guilt as she sat down at his desk and opened the top drawer. Nothing unusual there, just office supplies, a few business cards, a notebook filled with meeting notes. The second drawer contained files labeled with client names, all neatly organized. The bottom drawer was locked. Sarah sat back, frowning. What was Michael hiding in a locked drawer? She tried a few obvious places where he might keep a key, under the desk blotter, taped to the bottom of the drawer, on his keychain that he sometimes left in his nightstand, but found nothing. Turning to his computer, Sarah tried a few password combinations. His birthday, their anniversary, his childhood dog's name. None worked. Michael was too security-conscious for such obvious passwords. Frustrated, Sarah leaned back in the chair. This wasn't getting her anywhere. She needed a different approach. That evening, when Michael texted that he would be late due to drinks with the investor, Sarah replied with a supportive message, telling him not to worry and to take his time. Then she grabbed her jacket and car keys. She had never followed anyone before, and wasn't entirely sure how to do it without being spotted. Thankfully, Chicago's evening traffic provided plenty of cover, as she trailed Michael's distinctive black Audi from a distance, careful to stay several cars behind. To her surprise, Michael headed north, away from the financial district where most client meetings took place. He drove into Ravenswood, an area of the city known for its tree-lined streets and historic homes, eventually parking outside a modest single-story house with blue shutters. Sarah parked half a block away, watching as Michael approached the house, a small package tucked under his arm. He didn't knock or ring the bell, instead using a key to let himself in. The curtains were drawn across the front windows, making it impossible to see inside. Sarah sat in her car debating her next move. Should she approach the house, peek through the windows, confront Michael? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. "Meeting running long. Don't wait up." Sarah stared at the phone, anger and hurt warring inside her. Whatever was happening in that house with the blue shutters, it wasn't a business meeting. She waited for nearly 2 hours, watching the house for any sign of movement. Finally, just after 10 p.m., the front door opened and Michael emerged. He wasn't alone. A woman stepped onto the porch with him. Tall, blonde, perhaps in her mid-40s. They spoke briefly, and then, to Sarah's horror, the woman embraced Michael, pressing a kiss to his cheek before he turned to leave. Sarah ducked down in her seat as Michael walked to his car, her mind reeling. Was this it? Was Michael having an affair? It seemed both the most obvious and most devastating explanation. She waited until Michael's car had disappeared down the street before starting her own engine. The drive home was a blur, tears occasionally blurring her vision as she tried to process what she had seen. By the time Michael arrived home an hour later, Sarah had composed herself, sitting in the living room with a book she wasn't reading and a glass of wine she hadn't tasted. "Hey," Michael said, looking surprised to find her still awake. "I thought you'd be in bed by now." "Couldn't sleep," Sarah replied, studying his face for signs of guilt. "How was your meeting?" "Productive," Michael said, loosening his tie. "I think we might have a new investor on board." The lie slid so easily from his lips that Sarah almost doubted what she had seen with her own eyes. Almost. "That's great," she said, forcing a smile. "Anyone I know?" "Just a guy Dad introduced me to, old family friend." Michael yawned, stretching his arms above his head. "I'm beat. Coming to bed?" "In a bit," Sarah said. "I want to finish this chapter." Michael nodded, leaning down to kiss the top of her head before heading upstairs. Sarah remained in the living room long after she heard the shower running, and then stop after she heard the familiar creak of their bed as Michael got in. She sat there, turning over the facts in her mind, trying to make sense of what was happening to her marriage. Who was the blonde woman? What was in the package Michael had brought her? And why the secrecy, the late-night phone calls, the lies? Sarah knew she couldn't confront Michael without more information. She needed to know exactly what she was dealing with before she decided what to do. The next morning, after Michael left for work, Sarah returned to Ravenswood. The house with the blue shutters looked different in daylight, smaller, older, with a well-tended garden that suggested care and permanence. A silver Honda Civic sat in the driveway. Sarah parked across the street and watched the house, unsure of her next move. She couldn't just knock on the door and demand answers. What would she say? "Hello, I'm stalking my husband and saw him visit you last night. Care to explain?" As she debated, the front door opened, and the blonde woman emerged, dressed in scrubs with a tote bag slung over her shoulder. She locked the door behind her, got into the Honda, and drove away. Sarah followed on impulse, maintaining a discreet distance as the Honda headed toward the city center. 20 minutes later, the woman parked in a staff lot at Northwestern Memorial Hospital and hurried inside through a side entrance. A nurse, doctor, some type of healthcare worker at least. Sarah noted the information, adding it to her mental file of clues. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of editing photos from her latest shoot, while her mind kept returning to the woman in scrubs and her connection to Michael. That evening, Sarah made a decision. The next time Michael visited the Blue House, she would find a way inside. She needed to see for herself what was happening between her husband and the mystery woman. She didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Michael announced he had a late meeting with a client who was flying in from New York. Sarah nodded, pretending to accept the explanation, and suggested she might go out with her friend Jenna for drinks. "Have fun," Michael said, kissing her goodbye. "Don't wait up." As soon as he left, Sarah called Jenna, asking if she would be willing to provide an alibi if Michael happened to call. Jenna, concerned by the unusual request, pressed for details. "I think Michael might be cheating on me," Sarah admitted, the words painful to say aloud. "I need to find out for sure." "Oh, Sarah." Jenna's voice softened with sympathy. "Are you sure? This doesn't sound like the Michael you've described to me." "I'm not sure of anything anymore," Sarah replied. "That's why I need to do this." With Jenna's reluctant agreement secured, Sarah once again followed Michael to Ravenswood. This time she parked further away and approached the house on foot after Michael had gone inside. The blue shutters were closed as before, but Sarah noticed a small gap in the curtains covering a side window. Heart pounding, she crept across the lawn to peer through the opening. The window looked into what appeared to be a living room, sparsely furnished but neat. Michael sat on a sofa, his head in his hands, while the blonde woman stood nearby, arms crossed over her chest. They appeared to be arguing, though Sarah couldn't hear what they were saying. The woman gestured emphatically, pointing toward a hallway that led deeper into the house. Michael shook his head repeatedly, his posture defeated. Sarah shifted position, trying to get a better view when her foot caught on a garden hose. She stumbled, catching herself against the side of the house with a thud. Inside, both Michael and the woman froze, looking toward the window. Sarah ducked down, barely breathing, praying they hadn't seen her. After a moment, she heard footsteps approaching the front door. Sarah scrambled away from the window, racing across the lawn and down the street to where her car was parked. She had just slid into the driver's seat when the front door of the blue house opened and Michael stepped out, scanning the street with a troubled expression. Sarah slumped down in her seat, heart hammering in her chest. She had nearly been caught spying on her own husband. The realization sent a wave of shame through her, quickly followed by renewed anger. None of this would be happening if Michael had been honest with her. As she drove home, Sarah tried to make sense of what she had seen. The argument suggested that whatever was happening between Michael and this woman wasn't a simple affair. There was tension, conflict, not the easy intimacy of lovers, but if not an affair, then what? Sarah arrived home before Michael, giving her time to shower and change into pajamas, creating the illusion she had been home for a while. When Michael finally returned shortly after midnight, she pretended to be asleep. She heard him moving around the bedroom, the familiar sounds of him undressing and preparing for bed. Then, unexpectedly, she felt the mattress dip as he sat on the edge of her side of the bed. "Sarah," he whispered, "are you awake?" She kept her breathing steady, feigning sleep. After a moment, Michael sighed. "I'm sorry," he said softly, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Sarah remained motionless, though her heart was racing. What was he apologizing for? What had happened that he never intended? Michael gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering on her cheek. "I love you," he whispered. "Please remember that, no matter what." Then he moved away, settling on his side of the bed. Sarah lay awake long after Michael's breathing had deepened into sleep, his words echoing in her mind like a warning. The next day, Sarah made a critical decision. While Michael was at work, she drove to his parents' home in the North Shore suburbs, hoping to find answers from the people who knew him best. Robert and Elizabeth Adler lived in a sprawling Tudor-style house set back from the road, surrounded by carefully manicured grounds. Sarah had always felt intimidated by the Adlers' wealth and the subtle way they reminded her that she came from a more modest background. Today, however, she pushed those feelings aside. Elizabeth answered the door, surprise registering on her perfectly made-up face. At 62, she maintained the elegance and poise of the beauty she had once been, her silver hair styled in a sleek bob. "Sarah, what a lovely surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "I was hoping to talk to you and Robert about something important." Elizabeth's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, dear. Come in. Robert is in his study." Sarah followed her mother-in-law through the grand foyer into a sitting room decorated in shades of blue and cream. Everything in the Adler home was immaculate, museum-like in its perfection. "I'll get Robert and some tea," Elizabeth said. "Make yourself comfortable." Alone in the sitting room, Sarah studied the family photos arranged on the mantelpiece. Most were formal portraits. The Adlers at charity galas, on ski trips, at graduation ceremonies. Michael as a serious-looking child in a prep school uniform. Michael and his younger sister Olivia posed stiffly with their parents. One photo caught Sarah's attention. A much younger Michael, perhaps 16, with his arm around a girl who wasn't Olivia. The girl had blonde hair and a wide smile, and something about her face seemed vaguely familiar. "That's Michael, with his cousin Megan." Robert Adler's voice came from behind her. "Taken the summer before she went to college." Sarah turned to face her father-in-law, a tall, imposing man with the same dark hair as Michael, though now streaked with grey. "I don't think I've met Megan," she said. "Is she your side or Elizabeth's?" A strange expression crossed Robert's face. Discomfort, perhaps, or sadness. "Elizabeth's sister's daughter," he said after a brief hesitation. "The family isn't close." Before Sarah could ask more questions, Elizabeth returned with a tea tray. "So what brings you to see us today, Sarah?" she asked, pouring tea into delicate china cups. Sarah accepted a cup, gathering her courage. "I'm worried about Michael," she said directly. "He's been acting strangely since our wedding. Late nights, secretive phone calls, unexplained absences." The look that passed between Robert and Elizabeth confirmed Sarah's suspicion that they knew something. "What makes you think something's wrong?" Robert asked cautiously. "Because I followed him," Sarah admitted, "to a house in Ravenswood with blue shutters. He meets a woman there, blonde, works at Northwestern Memorial. I saw them together." Elizabeth's teacup clattered against its saucer. "You've been spying on Michael." "I've been trying to understand why my husband is lying to me," Sarah countered, her voice firm despite the tremor she felt inside. "Who is she, Robert? What's going on?" Robert set his cup down carefully, his expression grave. "I think you should discuss this with Michael." "I'm asking you," Sarah insisted. "Is he having an affair?" Elizabeth gave a short, humorless laugh. "An affair? No, Sarah. Michael isn't having an affair." "Then what? Please, I deserve to know the truth." Robert and Elizabeth exchanged another look, having one of those silent conversations that long-married couples perfect. Finally, Robert sighed. "It's not our place to tell you, Sarah. This is something Michael needs to explain." "But you know what it is," Sarah pressed. "You know why he's sneaking around lying to me just weeks after our wedding." "Marriage is complicated," Elizabeth said, her voice softening. "The Adler family has certain expectations, certain responsibilities. Michael takes those very seriously." "What does that mean?" Sarah demanded, frustration building inside her. "It means," Robert said firmly, "that you need to talk to your husband. Tell him you came here. Tell him what you've seen. Make him explain. And if he won't," Robert's expression hardened, "then you have a decision to make about what kind of marriage you want." Sarah left the Adler house with more questions than answers, a growing sense of dread settling in her stomach. Whatever Michael was hiding, his parents knew about it and weren't going to help her uncover the truth. That night, when Michael returned home from work, Sarah was waiting for him in the living room, 2 glasses of wine poured on the coffee table. "We need to talk," she said as he set down his briefcase, "about the house in Ravenswood with the blue shutters." Michael froze, the color draining from his face. "What did you say?" "I know you've been going there," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I followed you twice. I saw the blonde woman. I went to your parents today, but they wouldn't tell me anything." Michael sank onto the sofa across from her, looking suddenly exhausted. "You went to my parents? I didn't know what else to do," Sarah exclaimed. "My husband is sneaking around, lying about where he's going, having secret conversations in the middle of the night. What was I supposed to think?" "Not this," Michael said quietly. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." "Find out what, Michael? What are you hiding from me?" Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Sarah had seen many times before. "It's complicated," he began. "Don't," Sarah interrupted. "Don't tell me it's complicated. Tell me the truth. Who is she? What were you arguing about when I saw you through the window?" Michael's head snapped up. "You were looking through the window? Jesus, Sarah." "Don't make this about me," Sarah shot back. "I wouldn't have had to resort to that if you had been honest with me." For a long moment, Michael was silent, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Her name is Lisa," he said. "Lisa Brennan. She's a nurse at Northwestern." "And?" Sarah prompted when he didn't continue. Michael looked up, his eyes meeting hers. And she's taking care of my brother. Sarah stared at Michael, certain she had misheard him. Your brother? Michael, you don't have a brother. You have a sister, Olivia. Michael's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. That's what everyone thinks. That's what my parents wanted everyone to think. He reached for the wineglass Sarah had poured, draining half of it in one swallow before continuing. I do have a brother. His name is Thomas. He's 2 years younger than me, and he's been living in that house in Ravenswood for the past 6 years, ever since he was released from the psychiatric hospital. Sarah felt as if the floor had tilted beneath her. A psychiatric hospital? Michael, what are you talking about? Why would your family hide the existence of your brother? Michael set the glass down, his eyes not meeting hers. Because Thomas is different. He has severe schizophrenia. It started when he was 15. Hallucinations, paranoia, violent outbursts. My parents tried everything. Medication, therapy, specialized schools. Nothing worked. When he was 19, he attacked my father with a kitchen knife, convinced Dad was trying to poison him. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. After that, Thomas was committed to a long-term psychiatric facility in Wisconsin. My parents told everyone he had gone to study abroad. Then, when it became clear he wouldn't be coming home anytime soon, they started telling people he had decided to stay in Europe. Eventually, they just stopped mentioning him at all. That's horrible, Sarah whispered. How could they just erase him like that? Michael's expression hardened. You don't understand the Adler family, Sarah. Image is everything. A son with severe mental illness didn't fit the picture they wanted to present to the world. But you kept in touch with him? Michael nodded. I visited him whenever I could. We were close as kids before his illness. I couldn't just abandon him like my parents did. And now he lives in that house in Ravenswood, with Lisa the nurse. Lisa is his full-time caregiver, Michael explained. She lives in the guest house behind the main house. Thomas can't live independently. He needs help managing his medication, maintaining routines. Dealing with episodes when they occur, Lisa provides that support. Sarah tried to process this information, her mind struggling to reconcile this revelation with the man she thought she knew. Why didn't you tell me about him? We've been together for 1.5 years, Michael. We're married. Michael ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly older than his 38 years. I wanted to, so many times, but my parents, they made me promise not to tell anyone. Not friends, not colleagues, and especially not someone I was dating. I'm not just someone you're dating, Sarah exclaimed, hurt bubbling up inside her. I'm your wife. We took vows to share our lives. I know, Michael said, his voice breaking, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you since before the wedding. That's what you heard that night in the hotel bathroom, me arguing with my father on the phone. He called to remind me that Thomas remains our family's secret, that I had promised not to tell you. Sarah remembered the muffled voice she had heard, the strain in Michael's tone as he said he couldn't do this anymore. It made a terrible kind of sense now. So the meetings, the late nights, you've been visiting Thomas? Sarah asked, trying to piece everything together. Michael nodded. 3 times a week. Sometimes more if he's having a difficult period. He's been struggling lately. A new medication that isn't working well. That's what Lisa and I were arguing about when you saw us through the window. She thinks he needs to be hospitalized again, but I'm against it. Last time was bad. Sarah thought of the package she'd seen Michael carrying into the house. And what do you bring him? A small smile touched Michael's lips. Books, mostly. Thomas loves to read. Science fiction, history, philosophy. It's one of the few things that calms him. And art supplies, he's actually quite talented. And you pay for everything. The house, Lisa's salary? Yes. My parents contribute financially, but they haven't seen Thomas in person for years. Michael's voice hardened again. They've convinced themselves that funding his care absolves them of actually being present in his life. Sarah rose from her chair, pacing the living room as she tried to absorb everything Michael had told her. I don't understand why you couldn't trust me with this, Michael. Did you think I would judge you? Or him? No, Michael said quickly. It wasn't that. At first I was just following my parents' rule. No one outside the family knows about Thomas. Then, as we got more serious, I worried about how you would react to the deception, and honestly, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that you might see your future differently if you knew what you might be getting into. Mental illness like Thomas's can run in families. Our children could inherit it, and even if they don't, Thomas will always be a part of our lives, a complicated, sometimes difficult part. Sarah stopped pacing, turning to face him. So, you decided to just… What? Keep him secret forever? What was your plan, Michael? Michael looked away. I didn't have a plan. I've been caught between my parents' demands, Thomas's needs, and my feelings for you. The longer I waited to tell you, the harder it became. That night in the hotel, Sarah said slowly, you were so exhausted, so distant. Was that because of the argument with your father? Partly, Michael admitted, but also because Thomas had a severe episode the week before the wedding. I had to have him sedated so I could attend our rehearsal dinner. I felt guilty, torn between my responsibilities to him and to you. Sarah sank back into her chair, emotionally drained. I don't know what to think right now, Michael. I understand why Thomas needs you, but I don't understand why you couldn't be honest with me. We're supposed to be partners. I know, Michael said, reaching for her hand across the coffee table. And I'm sorry. More sorry than I can express. If I could do it over again. But you can't, Sarah interrupted, pulling her hand away. We are where we are. The question is, where do we go from here? Michael looked at her with a mixture of hope and fear. I want you to meet him, he said. Thomas, I want you to be part of his life too. Sarah hadn't expected that. Meet him. Will he be okay with that? I've actually told him about you, Michael admitted. Shown him our wedding photos. He's curious about you. You told him about me, but you couldn't tell me about him. Sarah couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Michael flinched. I know how it sounds, but Thomas has always been the one person I could be completely honest with. He doesn't judge, doesn't have expectations about how the Adler family should appear to the world. Sarah was silent for a long moment, considering everything she had learned. Finally, she said, I need time to process this, Michael. It's a lot to take in. I understand, Michael said, though disappointment showed clearly on his face. Take all the time you need. But I will meet him, Sarah added. Your brother is a part of your life, which means he's a part of mine too. I just need to wrap my head around the fact that my husband has been lying to me since the day we met. Michael winced at her words but didn't argue. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of secrets and revelations hanging heavy between them. There's more, Michael finally said, his voice so quiet Sarah almost didn't hear him. More what? More you should know. Michael took a deep breath. The house in Ravenswood isn't just where Thomas lives. It's where he'll likely always live, with full-time care for the rest of his life. And after my parents are gone, I'll be solely responsible for him, financially, legally, in every way. I assumed as much, Sarah said. He's your brother. What I'm trying to say, Michael continued, is that this will affect our future in ways you hadn't planned for. Vacations, retirement, even where we can live. Everything has to take Thomas into account. Sarah felt a flicker of anger. You should have thought about that before proposing to me without telling me about him. You're right, Michael conceded. I should have. I convinced myself I was protecting both you and Thomas, but really, I was being a coward. The blunt admission deflated some of Sarah's anger. Well, at least you can admit that much. I'll understand if this changes things for you, Michael said, his voice strained. If you want to reconsider our marriage. Sarah stared at him, shocked. Are you asking if I want a divorce because you have a brother with mental illness? No. I'm asking if you want a divorce because I lied to you about something fundamental, something that will affect our entire future together. Sarah stood up again, needing to move. I don't know what I want right now, Michael, except the truth. No more lies, no more secrets. I want to know everything. Everything about what? About Thomas, about your family, about what I've really married into. Michael nodded slowly. Okay, but it's not a pretty story. I gathered that much, Sarah said dryly. Start at the beginning. Michael refilled his wineglass, then topped off Sarah's. Thomas was always different, even as a child. More sensitive, more intense. He had trouble making friends, preferred books and drawing to sports or social activities. My parents were concerned, but not alarmed. They figured he was just introverted, maybe gifted. When did they realize it was more than that? When he was 15, Michael said, his eyes taking on a distant look as he remembered. He started having trouble sleeping, complained about voices whispering to him at night. Then came the paranoia. He was convinced our neighbors were spying on him, that his teachers were sending secret messages about him to the government. My parents took him to doctors who diagnosed schizophrenia with paranoid features. Sarah listened intently as Michael described the years that followed. Thomas's decline, The medications that made him a zombie, the alternative treatments that didn't work, the good periods that gave them hope, followed by devastating relapses. The worst was when he attacked Dad, Michael said. He had stopped taking his medication for weeks without anyone realizing. He became convinced that Dad was poisoning his food, trying to kill him. One night at dinner, he just snapped, grabbed a knife and lunged at him. Was your father hurt? A cut on his arm, 12 stitches. But the psychological damage was worse. After that, Dad couldn't be in the same room with Thomas without flinching. And Thomas, he was horrified by what he'd done once the episode passed. That's when he agreed to be committed. How old were you when this happened? 21. Just graduated from college, about to start business school. Michael's voice grew bitter. That's when my parents started the cover-up. Thomas was studying abroad. We had to stick to the story, present a united front to the world. The perfect Adler family couldn't have a son who tried to stab his father. Sarah could hear the resentment in Michael's voice. You didn't agree with their decision. No, but I was outvoted. Even Olivia thought it was for the best. She was in high school then, mortified by the idea of her friends finding out about Thomas. So Thomas just disappeared from your family narrative? Exactly. Meanwhile, he spent 5 years in that facility in Wisconsin. I visited him whenever I could, watched him waste away on medications that turned him into a shell of himself. It was hell, Sarah. Michael's eyes had grown damp, and Sarah felt her own throat tighten with emotion. Whatever anger she felt about his deception was tempered by the genuine pain she saw in him now. What happened after those 5 years? Thomas improved enough to be released to a group home, but that was a disaster. Too many people, too much stimulation. He had a major setback. That's when I decided to set him up in his own place with private care. My parents objected at first. They wanted him to remain institutionalized, but I threatened to go public with the whole story if they didn't help me fund it. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You blackmailed your parents? I did what I had to do for my brother, Michael said unapologetically, and it worked. They contribute to his care, though they've washed their hands of any personal involvement. And Lisa, how did she come into the picture? I found her through a specialized healthcare agency. She was working at a psychiatric hospital, but wanted something more personal, a chance to really make a difference in one person's life, rather than juggling dozens of patients. She's been with Thomas for 6 years now. She seems dedicated, Sarah said, remembering the woman's protective posture during the argument she had witnessed. She is. Thomas trusts her, which is rare for him. She knows how to talk him down when he's agitated, how to help him distinguish between what's real and what's in his mind. Michael hesitated. She's become like family to him. To me, too, in a way. Sarah absorbed this, trying to fit this new information into her understanding of her husband. The night we got married, she said, you were on the phone with your father in the bathroom. What exactly did he say that upset you so much? Michael's expression darkened. He called to remind me that under no circumstances was I to tell you about Thomas. He said, you've made your choice by marrying this girl, but don't drag her into family business she doesn't need to know about, as if Thomas was some shameful secret rather than my brother. And that's why you were so distant that night? Why you said you were tired? Michael nodded, shame evident in his face. I was exhausted from fighting with my father, from the weight of lying to you, from worrying about Thomas, who was having a difficult time with the wedding. I'm sorry, Sarah. Our wedding night should have been different. Yes, it should have, Sarah agreed. But not because you should have hidden your feelings better, because you should have trusted me with the truth. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, Sarah spoke again. I want to meet him. Thomas. Not next week or next month. Soon, tomorrow if possible. Michael looked surprised. Are you sure you don't need more time? I've had enough of secrets and waiting, Sarah said firmly. Thomas is your brother, which makes him my brother-in-law. I want to meet him. A mix of emotions crossed Michael's face. Relief, gratitude, and a lingering fear. I'll call Lisa tonight. Make sure it's a good day for him. These things need to be planned carefully. I understand, Sarah said. And Michael. From now on, complete honesty between us about everything. That's the only way this marriage works. I promise, Michael said, reaching for her hand again. This time, Sarah didn't pull away. The next evening, Sarah found herself standing beside Michael on the porch of the blue-shuttered house in Ravenswood, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness. Michael had spent the previous night explaining more about Thomas's condition, preparing her for what to expect. He might not make eye contact, Michael had told her. Don't take it personally, and if he seems distracted, it might be because he's hearing voices. Just speak normally. Don't whisper, or use a different tone than you would with anyone else. Now, as Lisa opened the door to greet them, Sarah tried to remember all of Michael's advice. He's having a good day, Lisa said, after greeting Sarah with cautious warmth. I told him you were coming. He's in the living room. Sarah followed Michael inside, taking in the simple, organized space. The furniture was sturdy and practical, with nothing fragile or potentially dangerous in sight. The walls were decorated with framed artwork, abstract paintings in bold colors that Sarah now realized must be Thomas's work. Thomas sat in an armchair by the window, a book open on his lap. He looked up as they entered, and Sarah was struck by his resemblance to Michael. The same dark hair, though Thomas's was longer and touched with premature grey. The same angular jaw, though Thomas's face was thinner, more gaunt. His eyes, however, were different, lighter than Michael's, almost amber, and carrying a wariness that made him appear older than his 36 years. Thomas, Michael said, his voice gentle. This is Sarah, my wife, the one I told you about. Thomas studied Sarah for a long moment, his gaze direct despite Michael's warning about eye contact. You're prettier than your pictures, he finally said, his voice slightly hoarse, as if from disuse. Sarah felt a smile spread across her face. Thank you, Thomas, it's really good to meet you. Michael said you're a photographer. Thomas set his book aside. Sarah noticed it was a volume on quantum physics. Do you photograph people or things? Mostly things, Sarah replied, following Michael's lead and sitting on the sofa across from Thomas. Buildings, architecture, sometimes landscapes. Thomas nodded, seeming to approve. Good. People lie to cameras. Buildings don't. There was a philosophical depth to the observation that caught Sarah off guard. That's actually very insightful, she said. I've never thought about it quite that way. A flicker of pleasure crossed Thomas's face at her response. He turned to Michael. Did you bring the book? Michael produced a package from his jacket. Another book, this one on astronomy. Thomas accepted it with careful hands, as if it were something precious. Thank you, he said formally. I've been waiting for this one. The visit continued for over an hour, with conversation flowing more easily than Sarah had expected. Thomas was clearly intelligent, with a breadth of knowledge that surprised her. He spoke about books he had read, scientific theories he found interesting, and the art he created. Occasionally he would pause mid-sentence, his attention seemingly drawn to something only he could hear, but these moments passed quickly. Lisa remained nearby, occasionally joining the conversation, but mostly observing from the kitchen doorway. Sarah noticed the attentive way she watched Thomas, alert to any signs of distress or agitation. As they prepared to leave, Thomas suddenly addressed Sarah directly. Will you come again? The simple question touched Sarah deeply. Yes, she said without hesitation. I'd like that very much. In the car on the way home, Sarah was quiet, processing the meeting. What are you thinking? Michael asked, glancing over at her. I'm thinking, Sarah said slowly, that your brother is remarkable, and that I understand now why you've devoted so much of yourself to him. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Do you forgive me for not telling you sooner? Sarah considered the question carefully. I'm still hurt that you didn't trust me, she admitted. But I understand better now why it was complicated for you. It's not just your secret. It's Thomas's life, your parents' deception, a whole family system you've been trapped in. That doesn't excuse my lying to you. No, it doesn't, Sarah agreed, but it helps me understand it, and understanding is the first step toward forgiveness. Michael reached across the console to take her hand. Thank you for meeting him, for trying to understand. He's family, Michael. My family now, too. Over the weeks that followed, Sarah accompanied Michael on his visits to Thomas more often than not. She found herself genuinely enjoying these visits, getting to know this previously hidden member of her new family. She began bringing her camera with Thomas's permission, documenting his artwork, and occasionally, on his good days, taking portraits that captured a side of him Michael said he hadn't seen in years. Sarah also found an unexpected ally in Lisa, whose initial wariness had given way to a tentative friendship. Over coffee one afternoon, while Michael and Thomas discussed a book they were both reading, Lisa confided in Sarah. I wasn't sure about you at first, she admitted. The Adlers, they have a way of putting image above everything else. I was afraid you might be like them. I'm nothing like them, Sarah assured her. except for Michael, and even he struggles with their values. Lisa nodded. I've seen that. He's different from his parents. He actually cares about Thomas as a person, not just as a problem to be managed. What about Olivia? Sarah asked, curious about Michael's sister, who she had met only briefly at the wedding. Does she ever visit? Twice in 6 years, Lisa said, her disapproval evident. And both times were uncomfortable for everyone. She treats Thomas like he's contagious, or like he might snap at any moment. Sarah thought about the Adler family dynamics, the web of secrets and avoidance that had shaped Michael's life long before she entered it. It must be lonely for Michael, being the only one who truly shows up for Thomas. It has been, Lisa agreed. That's why I'm glad he has you now. Those words stayed with Sarah as she and Michael drove home that evening. The spring air had turned warm, promising summer, and they had the windows down, letting the breeze flow through the car. I've been thinking, Sarah said as they waited at a red light, about our future with Thomas as part of it. Michael glanced at her, a hint of worry in his expression. What about it? I think we should consider moving closer to him, Sarah said. Not right away, but eventually. It would make visits easier, make it possible for you to be there quickly if there's an emergency. Michael stared at her, clearly surprised by the suggestion. You'd be willing to do that? Move from Lincoln Park to Ravenswood? Why not? It's a nice area, good restaurants close to the Brown Line, and it would make our lives simpler in many ways. The light turned green, but Michael didn't immediately accelerate, still processing her words. A car behind them honked, jolting him back to attention. Sarah Adler, he said as he drove through the intersection. You continue to amaze me. Sarah smiled, feeling for the first time since their wedding night that they were truly building something together, something honest and real. The secret that had threatened to destroy their marriage had instead, once revealed, strengthened it in unexpected ways. 6 months into their marriage, Sarah and Michael had settled into a new normal. They visited Thomas 3 times a week together, with Michael making additional visits on his own when necessary. Sarah had developed her own relationship with Thomas, bringing him photography books and listening to his often insightful observations about light and composition. They had also begun house hunting in Ravenswood, looking for a place within walking distance of Thomas's house. Today they had an appointment to see a Victorian-era home just 2 blocks from the blue-shuttered house where Thomas lived. It needs work, the real estate agent warned as she unlocked the front door, but it has good bones, and the price reflects the condition. Sarah stepped inside, immediately drawn to the original woodwork and tall windows that flooded the space with natural light. Michael, look at these floors, she said, gesturing to the herringbone parquet beneath their feet. Michael was examining the ceiling, where intricate plasterwork surrounded a central medallion. This place must have been something in its day. They toured the 3-story house, noting the outdated kitchen, the bathrooms that needed complete renovation, and the 3rd-floor attic space that would make a perfect studio for Sarah's photography. What do you think? Michael asked as they stood in the backyard, surveying the overgrown garden and aging detached garage. I think it's a lot of work, Sarah said honestly, but I also think it could be amazing, and being so close to Thomas would make everything easier, Michael finished. I could walk over in 5 minutes if Lisa needed me. They exchanged a look of mutual understanding. This house, with all its flaws and potential, represented more than just a place to live. It was a commitment to the life they were building together, one that fully included Thomas. Let's make an offer, Sarah decided, squeezing Michael's hand. Later that evening, as they celebrated with dinner at their favorite restaurant, Michael's phone rang. He checked the caller ID, his expression shifting from contentment to concern. It's Lisa, he said, rising from the table. I should take this. Sarah watched through the restaurant window as Michael paced on the sidewalk outside, his body language tense. When he returned to the table several minutes later, his face was grim. Thomas is having an episode, he said, already signaling for the check. A bad one. Lisa says he's been deteriorating all day, refusing medication, becoming increasingly paranoid. Sarah gathered her purse and jacket. Do we need to go there? Michael nodded. Lisa thinks my presence might help calm him. I'm sorry about dinner. Don't apologize, Sarah said firmly. This is family. It comes first. The drive to Ravenswood was tense, Michael repeatedly calling Lisa for updates, while Sarah navigated through evening traffic. By the time they arrived at the Blue House, darkness had fallen, the porch light casting long shadows across the lawn. Lisa met them at the door, her professional calm belied by the worry in her eyes. "He's in his bedroom," she said without preamble. "He's convinced someone has planted cameras in the house, that they're watching him, recording everything he does." "Has he taken his medication today?" Michael asked, already moving toward the hallway that led to Thomas's room. "No. He thinks I'm trying to poison him," Lisa said. "I was going to call for an emergency psychiatric team, but I wanted to try having you talk to him first." Michael nodded, turning to Sarah. "Maybe you should wait out here. He might not be himself." "I'm coming with you," Sarah said decisively. "If it gets too much, I'll step out, but I want to help if I can." Michael looked like he might argue, but then nodded, accepting her decision. Together they approached Thomas's bedroom, Michael knocking gently on the closed door. "Thomas, it's Michael. Can I come in?" There was no response, just the sound of movement inside the room. "I'm going to open the door, okay?" Michael said, his voice calm and steady, despite the tension Sarah could see in his shoulders. Slowly, he turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. Thomas's bedroom was in disarray. Books pulled from shelves, bedding stripped from the mattress, drawers pulled open and contents scattered. Thomas himself stood by the window, his back to the wall, eyes wide and darting around the room. He had a screwdriver in his hand. "They're everywhere," he said, his voice hoarse and frightened. "In the light fixtures, the vents, even the smoke detector. They're watching me, Michael, recording everything." "Who is Thomas?" Michael asked, keeping his distance but maintaining eye contact. "The ones who want to steal my thoughts," Thomas replied, as if it should be obvious. "They're collecting data, building a profile. They want to duplicate my brain." Sarah remained in the doorway, watching as Michael slowly moved further into the room, hands visible at his sides in a non-threatening posture. "That sounds scary," Michael said, his voice gentle. "But I don't think anyone is recording you, Thomas. I think your mind might be playing tricks on you right now." Thomas's gaze fixed on Sarah, noticing her for the first time. "Who is she?" he demanded, raising the screwdriver slightly. "Is she one of them?" "That's Sarah, remember, my wife. You've met her many times," Michael said calmly. "She's here because she cares about you, just like I do." Thomas stared at Sarah, confusion evident on his face. "Sarah?" he repeated, as if testing the name. "The photographer." "That's right," Sarah said, keeping her voice soft and even. "We looked at your astronomy book together last week, remember? You were telling me about nebulae." A flicker of recognition crossed Thomas's face, followed by uncertainty. "I don't. Everything's mixed up. I can't tell what's real anymore." "I know," Michael said sympathetically. "That must be terrifying. But I'm real, Thomas. Sarah's real. Lisa's real. And we're all here to help you." Thomas's grip on the screwdriver loosened slightly. "The cameras aren't real?" "No," Michael confirmed. "There are no cameras, no recording devices. Your room is safe." "But I can see them," Thomas insisted, though with less conviction than before. "Right there in the smoke detector." "Would it help if I looked at the smoke detector?" Sarah offered, surprising both brothers. "I could check it for you, make sure it's just a regular smoke detector." Thomas considered this, then nodded cautiously. "You would know, wouldn't you? Because of the cameras you use." "Exactly," Sarah said, slowly entering the room. "I know what recording equipment looks like." With Michael's worried gaze following her, Sarah carefully approached the smoke detector on the ceiling. It was standard issue, like thousands of others in homes across Chicago. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to a chair that had been overturned in Thomas's search. When he nodded, she righted the chair and stood on it, examining the smoke detector closely. "This is just a regular smoke detector," she reported, looking directly at Thomas. "See this little light? It blinks when the battery is working. There's no camera lens, no microphone, nothing that could record you." Thomas watched her intently, clearly wanting to believe her but struggling against his own perceptions. "What about the air vent?" he asked, pointing to a ceiling vent. For the next half hour, Sarah and Michael methodically checked each spot Thomas identified as suspicious, calmly explaining what they were seeing and why it couldn't be surveillance equipment. Gradually, Thomas's agitation decreased, though he remained tense and watchful. "Would you be willing to take your medication now?" Michael eventually asked. "It might help clear your thinking." Thomas hesitated, conflict visible on his face. "What if it's poison?" "It's not poison," Michael assured him. "It's the same medication you've been taking for years. It helps you distinguish between what's real and what isn't." "I'll get it," Lisa said from the doorway, where she had been observing quietly, "and a glass of water." When she returned, Thomas looked at the pills in her palm with suspicion. "How do I know?" Michael held out his hand. "Give one to me," he said to Lisa. When she did, he put it in his mouth and swallowed it dry. "See? Not poison." The gesture, simple but profound in its trust, seemed to reach Thomas. He accepted the remaining pills and the water from Lisa, swallowing them with a trembling hand. "It will take a little while to work," Lisa reminded him gently. "Why don't we sit in the living room? I could make some tea." Thomas nodded, exhaustion beginning to replace the fear and agitation that had driven him all day. He allowed Michael to lead him to the living room, where he sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking small and vulnerable. Sarah helped Lisa in the kitchen, preparing tea and arranging cookies on a plate. "Does this happen often?" she asked quietly. "Not this severely," Lisa replied, filling the kettle. "He's been stable for months. Something triggered this episode, but I'm not sure what." When they returned to the living room, Thomas had his head in his hands, Michael sitting beside him with a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," Thomas was saying, his voice muffled. "I know it's not real, but it feels real. The voices are so convincing." "You don't need to apologize," Michael told him firmly. "This is your illness, not your fault." They sat together, the four of them, drinking tea and talking quietly, as Thomas gradually became more coherent, the medication beginning to take effect. By midnight, he was calm enough to return to his bedroom, though he asked Lisa to check it once more before he would lie down. "I'll stay here tonight," Michael told Sarah after Thomas had finally fallen asleep, "in case he has another episode." "I'll stay too," Sarah decided. "We can take the guest room Lisa mentioned." Michael looked at her with gratitude and something deeper, a recognition of the commitment she was making, not just to him, but to his brother as well. "Are you sure? It might be a rough night." "I'm sure," Sarah said. "We're in this together, remember?" In the guest room, lying beside Michael on a bed that was narrower than they were used to, Sarah reflected on the events of the evening. She had seen Thomas at his most vulnerable, witnessed the reality of his illness in a way that went beyond Michael's descriptions or her own research. "Thank you," Michael whispered in the darkness, "for being here, for helping with Thomas. Most people would have run screaming by now." "I'm not most people," Sarah replied, finding his hand under the covers. "And Thomas is family. Our family. I keep waiting for you to realize what you've gotten yourself into and change your mind," Michael admitted. "A husband who lied to you, a brother-in-law with severe mental illness, in-laws who are more concerned with appearances than reality." "Michael," Sarah interrupted, "I'm not going anywhere. Yes, you should have told me about Thomas sooner. Yes, your parents are difficult. And yes, there will be challenging days like today. But there's also love here. Between you and Thomas, between you and me, that's worth fighting for." Michael was silent for a long moment, and Sarah thought he might have fallen asleep. Then she felt his hand tighten around hers. "I don't deserve you," he said softly. "Probably not," Sarah teased. "But you're stuck with me anyway." The next morning, Thomas was calm and lucid, though clearly embarrassed by his behavior the previous night. He apologized repeatedly to Sarah, who assured him no apology was necessary. "Everyone has bad days," she told him over breakfast. "Yours just look different than most people's." Thomas smiled faintly at that. "Michael chose well," he said, glancing at his brother. "She's a keeper." "I know," Michael agreed, his expression softening as he looked at Sarah across the table. Later that day, after Thomas had settled into his usual routine with Lisa's guidance, Sarah and Michael returned home to their Lincoln Park brownstone. They were both exhausted, physically and emotionally drained from the intensity of the night. "We need to talk about the house," Michael said as they collapsed onto the sofa. "The one in Ravenswood." Sarah nodded, knowing what was coming. "You're having second thoughts." "Not about moving closer to Thomas," Michael clarified, "but about the condition of the house. After last night, I'm thinking we need something move-in ready, not a major renovation project. If Thomas has another crisis, we need to be able to respond quickly, not be dealing with contractors and construction delays." "I was thinking the same thing," Sarah admitted. "As much as I loved that Victorian, it's not practical for our situation right now." Michael looked at her with a mixture of relief and admiration. "How did I get so lucky? Most wives would be furious about changing plans for a house they'd fallen in love with." "Most wives haven't spent the night talking their brother-in-law through a paranoid episode," Sarah pointed out. "It changes your perspective on what matters. So we keep looking for something move-in ready in Ravenswood." "We keep looking," Sarah agreed. "And in the meantime, we make sure Lisa has all the support she needs." She can't handle nights like last night on her own. Michael nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that too. Maybe we should consider hiring a second caregiver, someone who could provide backup during difficult periods or give Lisa regular time off. That's a good idea, Sarah said. Lisa needs breaks and Thomas might benefit from another person in his support system. They spent the afternoon researching care options, making calls to healthcare agencies, and adjusting their house hunting criteria. It wasn't how either of them had planned to spend their Saturday, but there was a sense of purpose to it, a shared commitment that brought them closer. As evening approached, Michael's phone rang, his father's number appearing on the screen. Michael stared at it for a moment before answering, putting the call on speaker so Sarah could hear. "Hello, Dad," he said, his voice neutral. "Michael." Robert Adler's voice filled the room. "Your mother and I were hoping you and Sarah might join us for dinner tomorrow night. It's been a while since we've seen you both." Michael glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "We'd like that," he said. "What time?" 7 o'clock. "And Michael, this is a family dinner. I trust you'll be discreet about certain matters." The implication was clear. "Don't mention Thomas." Michael's jaw tightened visibly. "Actually, Dad, if you're inviting my family to dinner, that should include Thomas. At least in conversation, since he can't attend in person." A heavy silence followed this declaration. "Michael," Robert finally said, his voice strained, "you know how your mother feels about discussing Thomas in social settings." "This isn't a social setting," Michael countered. "It's a family dinner, and Thomas is family." "Is Sarah there with you?" Robert asked, changing tactics. "I'm here, Robert," Sarah spoke up, "and I agree with Michael. Thomas is family, and pretending he doesn't exist isn't healthy for anyone." Another silence, longer this time. Sarah could almost hear Robert Adler recalculating his approach. "I see," he finally said. "Perhaps another time then, when everyone is feeling more reasonable." "That's your choice, Dad," Michael said evenly. "But Sarah and I are a package deal now, and we've agreed that we won't participate in erasing Thomas from the family narrative." "I see," Robert repeated, his voice cooling several degrees. "I'll let your mother know you won't be joining us." The call ended without further pleasantries. Michael set the phone down on the coffee table, looking both drained and oddly relieved. "Well, that was predictable," he said with a humorless laugh. Sarah moved closer to him on the sofa, leaning against his shoulder. "You stood up to him. That couldn't have been easy." "Easier with you beside me," Michael admitted. "I've spent so many years trying to please my parents, while also being there for Thomas. It's exhausting, constantly navigating between those worlds." "You don't have to do that anymore," Sarah said firmly. "We can create our own family culture, one where everyone belongs, everyone is acknowledged." Michael wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "Even if it means a strained relationship with my parents." "Even then," Sarah confirmed. "Though I hope they'll come around eventually." The conversation with Robert sparked a shift in their approach to the Adler family dynamics. Rather than trying to appease his parents while secretly supporting Thomas, Michael began speaking openly about his brother in all family contexts. When Olivia called to complain about being caught in the middle of the conflict with their parents, Michael gently but firmly suggested she consider her own role in maintaining harmful family secrets. 2 weeks later, they found a 2-story brick home in Ravenswood, just 3 blocks from Thomas's house. It was smaller than their Lincoln Park brownstone, but well-maintained, with an updated kitchen and a sunroom that would make a perfect photography studio for Sarah. They made an offer the same day they saw it, and to their surprise it was accepted without counter-offers or complications. "It feels right," Sarah said, as they walked through the empty rooms after the inspection. "Like we're meant to be here." Michael nodded, pausing by a window that overlooked the backyard with its mature maple trees. "I think Thomas will like visiting here. The neighborhood is quiet, not too much stimulation." "You think he'll be able to visit?" Sarah asked, surprised. Thomas rarely left his own house, finding new environments overwhelming. "Not right away," Michael acknowledged, "but eventually with preparation and support. Lisa thinks it would be good for him to have a safe place outside his home that he could visit occasionally." The idea of Thomas one day sitting in their kitchen or garden, comfortable enough to leave his secure environment, filled Sarah with unexpected warmth. It represented progress, hope, the possibility of a more connected family life than Thomas had experienced in years. Moving day arrived in early August, the Chicago summer at its peak, as they directed movers and unpacked essentials. By late afternoon, exhausted and sweaty, they collapsed onto their couch, now positioned in their new living room. "We did it," Sarah said, resting her head on Michael's shoulder. "We're officially Ravenswood residents." "Should we walk over and tell Thomas?" Michael suggested. "He's been anxious about the move, wondering if we'd really end up this close." "Let's do it," Sarah agreed, despite her fatigue. "It might help make it real for him." They walked the 3 blocks to the blue-shuttered house, the neighborhood quiet in the late afternoon heat. Lisa answered the door with a smile, already aware they had been moving in that day. "He's been watching the clock since morning," she told them, "asking every hour if you'd arrived yet." Thomas was in the backyard, sitting under a shade tree with a book. He looked up as they approached, his face lighting up with a smile that transformed his usually guarded features. "You're here," he said simply. "You really moved." "We really did," Michael confirmed, sitting in one of the lawn chairs near his brother. "Just 3 blocks away, like we promised." Thomas nodded, processing this information. "Can I see it sometime? Your new house?" The question, so normal, so ordinary between family members, yet so significant coming from Thomas, caught Michael off guard. He glanced at Sarah, who stepped forward. "Of course you can," she said warmly. "Whenever you feel ready. We could start with pictures, then maybe a virtual tour on a tablet, and eventually, when you're comfortable, a real visit." Thomas considered this graduated approach. "That sounds good. Pictures first, then the tablet thing." "I have my camera with me," Sarah offered, pulling her compact digital camera from her pocket. "I could take some photos right now and show you." Thomas nodded eagerly, and Sarah left to capture images of their new home. Empty rooms waiting to be filled, the garden with its maple trees, the front porch with its swing. When she returned 30 minutes later, Michael and Thomas were deep in conversation, their heads bent together over Thomas's book. "Just a theory," Thomas was saying, "but the multiverse concept makes mathematical sense, even if we can't prove it experimentally yet." "But if there are infinite universes," Michael countered, "doesn't that mean there's one where I didn't move closer to you, where we drifted apart?" Thomas pondered this. "Maybe. But in this universe, you're here. That's what matters." Sarah paused, not wanting to interrupt the moment between brothers. There was something profound in Thomas's simple statement, a philosophical acceptance that cut through all the complexity of quantum theories and family dynamics alike. "I have pictures," she finally announced, joining them under the tree. For the next half hour they sat together as Sarah showed Thomas their new home, answering his questions about the layout, the neighborhood, how long it had taken the movers to transport everything. Thomas was especially interested in the sunroom that would become Sarah's studio. "Will you take portraits of me there?" he asked unexpectedly. Sarah smiled, touched by the request. "I'd love to, when you're ready to visit." "Not yet," Thomas said quickly, "but maybe someday." "No rush," Michael assured him. "We'll be right here, whenever you're ready." As summer transitioned to fall, they settled into life in Ravenswood. Sarah converted the sunroom into a working studio, where she not only edited her architectural photography, but also began a personal project photographing the neighborhood. Michael adapted to his shorter commute to the financial district, using the extra time to visit Thomas more regularly. They hired a second caregiver, a gentle, patient man named David, who worked evening shifts 3 times a week, giving Lisa regular breaks and providing Thomas with another stable presence in his life. The arrangement worked better than they had hoped. Thomas responded well to David's calm demeanor and interest in science fiction. In October, just as the leaves were beginning to turn, Sarah received an unexpected call from Elizabeth Adler. "I'd like to meet for lunch," Michael's mother said, her voice formal but lacking its usual coolness. "Just the 2 of us, if you're available." Surprised, Sarah agreed, suggesting a cafe halfway between Ravenswood and the North Shore. Elizabeth accepted without argument, and they set a date for the following day. "What do you think she wants?" Sarah asked Michael that evening as they prepared dinner together. Michael shrugged, chopping vegetables with precise movements. "With my mother, it's hard to say. She might be extending an olive branch, or she might be planning to lecture you about family loyalty." "Well, I guess I'll find out tomorrow," Sarah said, not without apprehension. The cafe was busy when Sarah arrived the next day, but Elizabeth had secured a quiet table in the corner. She looked as elegantly put together as always in a tailored blazer and pearl earrings, her silver hair perfectly styled. "Thank you for meeting me," Elizabeth said after they had ordered. A salad for her, soup and sandwich for Sarah. I know things have been strained between our families. That's one way to put it, Sarah acknowledged, deciding directness was the best approach. May I ask what prompted this lunch invitation? Elizabeth's composure slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. I've been doing a lot of thinking since you and Michael moved to Ravenswood. About family, about choices, about regrets. Regrets? Sarah prompted when Elizabeth paused. Yes. Elizabeth's perfectly manicured hands fidgeted with her napkin. I have many regrets, Sarah. About Thomas primarily. About the decisions Robert and I made when he first became ill. Sarah remained silent, giving her mother-in-law space to continue. We thought we were protecting him and ourselves by keeping his condition private, but privacy became secrecy, and secrecy became erasure. Elizabeth's voice wavered on the last word. We effectively erased our own son from our lives. It's not too late to change that, Sarah said gently. Elizabeth looked up, her eyes unexpectedly bright with unshed tears. That's why I wanted to speak with you. Michael won't return my calls, and I can't blame him. But I was wondering if you might help me reconnect with Thomas. The request was so unexpected that Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. Elizabeth, I don't know if that's my place. Thomas has been hurt deeply by your absence in his life. I know, Elizabeth said quietly, and I have no right to expect forgiveness or welcome, but I'm his mother, Sarah, and I've missed 20 years of his life because of decisions I now recognize were terribly wrong. Sarah studied the older woman's face, looking for signs of insincerity or manipulation. Instead, she saw only genuine regret and a longing that seemed to have been buried for a very long time. Why now? She asked. What's changed? Elizabeth sighed, a sound heavy with accumulated grief. A friend of mine from the garden club lost her daughter last month. Sudden aneurysm, completely unexpected. She kept saying, I thought we had more time. It made me realize I've been acting as if there will always be time to make things right with Thomas. But that's not guaranteed, is it? No, Sarah agreed, it's not. And then, Elizabeth continued, when you and Michael moved to Ravenswood, specifically to be near Thomas, it highlighted how wrong our approach has been. While we've been pretending he doesn't exist, you've been rearranging your entire lives to include him. Their food arrived, interrupting the conversation momentarily. When the server left, Sarah leaned forward. I can't promise anything, she said carefully. Thomas's well-being has to come first, and Michael would need to be on board with any attempt at reconciliation. I understand, Elizabeth said, nodding. I'm not asking for immediate access or forgiveness, just a beginning, a chance to try to make amends. Sarah considered the request. I'll talk to Michael, she finally said, and if he's willing, we can discuss how to approach this with Thomas and his care team. It would need to be gradual, on Thomas's terms. That's all I'm asking for, Elizabeth said, relief evident in her voice. A chance. As they ate, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Elizabeth asked about Sarah's photography, their new house, the neighborhood. There was an awkwardness to the exchange, but also a tentative warmth that hadn't existed in their previous interactions. When Sarah relayed the conversation to Michael that evening, his initial reaction was skepticism. My mother has never admitted being wrong about anything, he said, ever, and now she's suddenly having regrets about how they've treated Thomas. She seemed sincere, Sarah said, but you know her better than I do. Could this be some kind of manipulation? Michael paced their living room, struggling with conflicting emotions. I don't know. Part of me wants to believe she's genuinely had a change of heart. Another part remembers 20 years of her prioritizing appearances over Thomas's well-being. What about giving her a chance to prove herself? Sarah suggested. Not with Thomas, not yet. But maybe she could meet with you, with Lisa, start to understand what Thomas's life is actually like now. Michael considered this. That might work. A step-by-step process, with clear boundaries. Over the following weeks, a careful reconciliation began. Elizabeth met with Michael several times, listening more than talking, as he explained the reality of Thomas's condition, his care needs, and the progress he had made over the years. She met with Lisa, asking detailed questions about Thomas's daily life and how she might eventually fit into it without causing disruption. Robert remained resistant, refusing to participate in what he called Elizabeth's project. But Elizabeth continued without him, showing a determination that surprised both Michael and Sarah. I never knew she had this in her, Michael confessed, after Elizabeth had spent an afternoon helping them arrange Thomas's art in their new home. They had decided to dedicate a wall in their living room to his paintings, a visible acknowledgement of his place in their family. This strength, this willingness to go against Dad's wishes. "People can surprise you," Sarah said, adjusting a frame on the wall, "especially when they're finally doing what they know is right." By December, Elizabeth had progressed to exchanging letters with Thomas. Simple notes at first, gradually building to longer correspondence as Thomas became more comfortable with this new connection to his mother. The letters revealed a side of Elizabeth that Michael barely recognized, warm, vulnerable, without the social polish that characterized her public persona. "She's trying so hard," Sarah observed one evening as they prepared for bed. "It's actually quite moving." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to revert to type. But so far, she's been remarkably consistent." People can change, Michael, especially when confronted with the consequences of their choices. The holiday season brought its own challenges. The Adler family traditionally hosted an elaborate Christmas Eve dinner, but with the ongoing rift between Elizabeth and Robert over Thomas, this year's gathering was uncertain. "What if we host Christmas Eve?" Sarah suggested one morning in early December. "Here, in our home. We could invite your parents, Olivia, and maybe even have Thomas join for a short time if he feels up to it." Michael looked skeptical. "That's a lot of potentially combustible elements in one room." "True," Sarah acknowledged, "but it's also a chance to establish new traditions, ones that include everyone. And if your father refuses to come because Thomas might be there, that's his choice." After discussing the idea with Lisa and Thomas's psychiatrist, they extended the invitation. To their surprise, both Elizabeth and Robert accepted, though Robert's response was notably terse. Olivia also agreed to attend, expressing cautious interest in reconnecting with Thomas. Christmas Eve arrived with a light snow falling, dusting Ravenswood with white, and creating a picture-perfect holiday scene. Sarah had spent days preparing their home, setting up a tree in the living room, arranging Thomas's artwork prominently, and planning a menu that included his favorite foods. Thomas had agreed to visit for the first hour of the gathering before dinner, when the interaction would be more structured and less overwhelming. David would accompany him from his house to theirs, remaining nearby for support. Elizabeth and Robert arrived first precisely on time. Elizabeth carried a small, carefully wrapped gift that Sarah knew was for Thomas. They had discussed appropriate presents, settling on a book about space photography that aligned with his interests. Robert appeared uncomfortable, glancing around the house with a critical eye that softened slightly when he noticed the family photos Sarah had arranged on the mantelpiece, including several of Thomas from recent months. "Your home is lovely," Elizabeth said warmly, handing Sarah a bouquet of winter flowers. "So welcoming." "Thank you," Sarah replied, accepting the flowers. "We've tried to make it a place where everyone in the family feels comfortable." Robert cleared his throat. Is he coming tonight?" "Thomas will be joining us briefly before dinner," Michael confirmed, his tone making it clear this was non-negotiable. "David is bringing him over at 6. Robert nodded stiffly, accepting a glass of wine from Sarah with a murmured thanks. Olivia arrived shortly after, bringing a nervous energy that filled the room as she hugged Michael and Sarah. "It's been so long," she said quietly to Michael. "I'm not sure what to say to him." "Just be yourself," Michael advised. "Thomas appreciates authenticity more than anything." At 6 o'clock precisely, the doorbell rang. Sarah opened it to find Thomas standing on the porch with David, dressed in a blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, his hair neatly combed. He looked nervous but determined. "Welcome," Sarah said warmly, stepping aside to let them in. "We're so glad you could come." Thomas entered slowly, taking in the decorations, the lights, the unfamiliar setting. His gaze moved to the living room, where his parents and sister waited, and he stopped, uncertainty crossing his face. "They came," he said quietly to Sarah. "All of them." "For you," Sarah confirmed. "Because you're family, Thomas. An important part of this family." Michael approached, placing a supportive hand on his brother's shoulder. "Ready?" Thomas nodded, squaring his shoulders. "Ready." What followed was 30 minutes of careful, sometimes awkward interaction. Elizabeth approached Thomas first, her composure cracking as she stood before the son she had effectively abandoned for 2 decades. "Thomas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you look well." "Thank you for your letters," Thomas replied formally. "I've kept them all." Elizabeth blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I've kept yours too." Robert remained more reserved, shaking Thomas's hand with an awkwardness that revealed his discomfort. But he made an effort, asking Thomas about his recent reading, showing interest in his responses. Olivia's reunion with her brother was the most emotional. As children, before Thomas's illness manifested, they had been close, sharing interests in science and art that Michael hadn't participated in. Seeing her brother now, older, changed by medication and illness, yet still recognizably Thomas, seemed to break something open in Olivia. "I missed you," she said simply, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry I stayed away." Thomas, never comfortable with emotional displays, nevertheless allowed Olivia to hug him briefly. "I missed you too," he admitted. No one else ever understood why the stars mattered so much. The gathering wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, of misunderstanding, of old wounds partially reopened, but there was also healing, tentative steps toward a new kind of family dynamic that acknowledged past mistakes without being defined by them. When Thomas indicated he was ready to leave, everyone understood. David prepared to walk him home, but Thomas paused at the door, looking back at the family gathered in Sarah and Michael's living room. "Thank you," he said, his gaze moving from face to face. "For coming, for being here. We'll do it again," Michael promised, "whenever you're ready." After Thomas left, the remaining family members sat down to dinner. The conversation was subdued at first, processing the emotional weight of Thomas's visit, but gradually, aided by good food and wine, a more natural rhythm emerged. "I never thought I'd see him again," Olivia admitted as they finished dessert. "I had convinced myself it was better that way, that he wouldn't want to see me after all this time." "That's what we all told ourselves," Elizabeth said, her usual polish replaced by raw honesty. "It was easier than acknowledging our failure." Robert, who had been mostly silent during dinner, finally spoke. "I was wrong," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "About Thomas, about how we handled his illness. I was wrong, and I've cost our family 20 years we can never get back." The admission hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity. Michael reached across the table to grasp his father's hand, a gesture of forgiveness that needed no words. Later that night, after their guests had departed, Sarah and Michael stood in their living room surveying the remnants of the gathering, empty wine glasses, dessert plates with cake crumbs, the Christmas tree lights still glowing softly. "I can't believe that actually happened," Michael said, shaking his head in wonder. "My father apologized. Thomas met with the whole family. No one had a breakdown or stormed out. It wasn't perfect," Sarah reminded him, "but it was real, and it's a beginning." Michael pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You made this happen, you know, all of it. Moving here, insisting on honesty, creating space for Thomas in our lives. You changed everything." "We did it together," Sarah corrected him. "Partners, remember?" Michael smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Partners." As they prepared for bed that night, Sarah thought about the journey they had taken since their wedding night, from secrets and suspicion to openness and healing. The moans she had heard through the bathroom door hadn't been evidence of betrayal, but of a man torn between family obligations and personal happiness, trying desperately to navigate impossible choices. In the end, there had been no need to choose. By embracing the truth, by refusing to participate in secrets and erasure, they had created something new, a family defined not by appearances, but by acceptance, not by perfection, but by love, in all its complicated, messy reality. Sarah thought of Thomas, back in his blue-shuttered house, perhaps looking at the book of space photography Elizabeth had given him. She thought of the wall in their living room, displaying his artwork, of the tentative plans for him to visit again in the new year, of the slow rebuilding of connections that had seemed irreparably broken, and she thought of Michael, who no longer had to live divided between worlds, who could finally be whole. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked as they lay in bed, the winter night quiet around them. "About how far we've come," Sarah replied. "From that night in the hotel, when I heard you through the door and imagined the worst." Michael's arm tightened around her waist. "I'm sorry I put you through that." "Don't be," Sarah said, turning to face him in the darkness. "Without that night, without my suspicions, we might never have gotten here. Sometimes the hardest beginnings lead to the best destinations." Michael was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "Do you ever regret it, marrying into all this complexity?" "Never," Sarah said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment." As they drifted toward sleep, Sarah thought about the many forms love could take, between husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, parents and children, about how love sometimes required difficult truths, uncomfortable confrontations, and the courage to break damaging patterns. On their wedding night, she had heard strange moans and imagined betrayal. What she had discovered instead was a family in need of healing, a husband carrying too many burdens alone, and her own capacity to embrace a life more complicated and ultimately more meaningful than she had ever imagined. Outside, snow continued to fall on Ravenswood, covering the distance between houses with a blanket of white. In the blue-shuttered house 3 blocks away, Thomas slept peacefully. In the North Shore, Robert and Elizabeth began the slow work of redefining their marriage without the weight of decades-old secrets. And here, in the home Sarah and Michael had created together, love had finally found firm ground on which to grow.